Screen.
That's very true. It can't be solid and then screen.
But I guess to me, it sounds like the mechanism for regulating like the appearance, maybe getting back at is the design review board. And maybe we should concentrate on what we absolutely do not want. And then everything in between is something that would be regulated through design review board. And maybe just look at the extreme structures that we absolutely would be like, no way. And then leave everything to them, because it sounds like there's so many architectural options, and even the screening, I would say, maybe that's something you leave to them, but have the absolute, no way, we don't want this, and stick to that as the regulation.
So that's setback.
Yeah, just like the very extremes that we are absolutely against, and then everything else, we have to leave it to the design review board to say, doesn't match with the block, doesn't, you know, maybe that's where it goes for.
And they do look at neighboring houses when additions and stuff go on, so.
And don't the neighbors get to object anyway?
So yeah, so they're currently notified if it's 200 square feet or more of an addition. We could modify that, concur with this to say if a new porch is added on, the neighbors must get notified as well. So we could beef up the notification
Yeah.
stipulation within that section of the code.
You typically can come and voice your concern about the design aspect, not necessarily like, no, I don't want them to do it.
Right,
Yeah.
but that would be, you know, where it would get, it sounds like a lot of our issues are maybe, like, at least for me, the uniformity aspect and stuff, some of that could be addressed with the design review board looking at and saying, it doesn't really go here, you know,
Or
first.
it doesn't match your housing type at all.
Right,
It's
exactly.
a Tudor, and I'm not an architect, so I'm gonna say the wrong thing. But example, like it's this type of housing and this, they don't have porches.
Correct. Yeah, I think the design review board, it's full of architects, they know their stuff in and out. So I personally have had good interactions with them in terms of that. And then if we just add the notification to the neighbors, that gives them the chance to come to the meeting and or weigh in so that that perspective is heard. I think that's an easy change to make.
Or did, the design review board was going to have guidelines that govern front yard porches, but those never got approved, I think.
They never finished them,
Or
so
did
they
they
never went in front of a board.
Correct, so they drafted residential design guidelines, and I want to say they're 70 to 80% done, but with staff transition, it never got picked up as an initiative. So they have, once again, proposed to take that back up. I personally don't have time to help them take that back up, so I made it clear if they want to do that, they need to form a subcommittee to tackle that and bring that separate of my specific role, but they were never adopted, correct?
Because I don't have a problem with us saying, no, you can't do this, you can do this, you can't do this. I just didn't like the second floor deck or porch option, you know, having,
Well, that can be regulated too.
yeah. So otherwise, the design requirements, besides that one, I was okay with.
So as it reads now for second floor, I had a question about that too. It is, you're not allowed to cover it, but you can have a second floor base, correct?
Correct.
Like which would be the top.
So if you had a duplex, you could cover the first floor, but have a walkout on top. That's how it's currently drafted. But if there's a desire to just limit it to one story, I think that's
What if you want to
Easy
see it on the top
compromise.
of your deck?
what's that?
Just saying, sometimes isn't it both? Like it's the top of someone else's porch and it's the, or deck.
Yeah, but there's a second unit upstairs, like a duplex.
All the houses are the same.
I don't have any concern about second one. I just, never was part of the conversation, so I didn't know how it's not allowed to be covered and, you know, it's. So the top one wouldn't be a deck, it would be it's not covered.
Some porch.
Yeah. Walkout landing, I have to.
I'm trying to figure out different definitions between the
They're all
four.
over the east side.
Yeah, they're both.
But unless you have a door going out, it's not gonna help you a whole lot. If your house-
Not ideal if there's not.
You can-
There's porches and second stories with no door and you want.
No railings, I've seen those too, there's all of this. Okay,
It's where we at.
And none of this applies to anything more than a single or two-family home, right?
Correct, I believe it is, I can make sure that's confirmed. Yeah, R5 and R6, well, that's patios. So patios specific is R5 and R6, we could add the specific of that. Difference with, well, I don't know if difference is the right word, but I'm not sure why patios were limited to R5 and R6 and not including the other residential districts. And so the porches were drafted for all residential districts, so I could clarify that's for residential districts, not commercial districts. But to that point, patios were restricted to R5 and R6, which is the predominant, other than Lake Drive, that is the zoning for most residential houses.
Yeah.
So I can, at a minimum, I can clarify if it's not in here, that this is for residential districts. The question would be whether or not,
Why does it matter? So what if you're a mixed use, like we're in the business district on Oakland, and it's the house right next to Forever Young?
it wouldn't have to matter, correct?
Um,
Or if you're a multi-story, if you're a multi-unit
Susan
apartment building,
Powers.
you want a covered entrance for your
Well, it was Susan
residents.
Powers' house, I think it's the structure that we're talking about more so than the use, but.
Well, that brings up a good question. So when you have a house that has a non-conforming or non-allowed structure, maybe it's got porches that would no longer be allowed if they were added on now. If that needs to be replaced or repaired for anything, are they allowed to be grandfathered in because they already had one
Yep, under the same
on
footprint.
the same footprint?
Yep. And then just the case of the Powers Realty, that is different setbacks, so that they probably could get a porch in there no matter what, because I think they probably build two line, quite honestly, so they'd be allowed to go into there, but I don't have an issue with allowing porches in commercial districts.
I don't either. I'm just saying, by specifying in these districts, it would prohibit.
Correct, so the current version doesn't specify it, so the current version allows it. The only thing that was specified was in the patio conversation, that was specified for whatever reason. But it was not included within this draft.
And also, did that answer the Robert's question? What is the thought process behind not having a side, not allowing it on the side? And I get why, the front is definitely, but I've seen side ones too, especially the duplexes. So, because sometimes there's a door on the side of the second unit, so if there's enough room and it doesn't, same thing like patios, similar.
And are you thinking of an interior lot or a corner lot? Because I did have a internal thought in allowing them, or drafting it with allowing a corner.
Corner lot, I think it should have no problem, but I have seen when I do doors, you go to a lot of these houses and they're duplexes. We have more than most people with duplexes, most communities. And you go around and that's where their front door is, and there are some, like little ones, not,
So yes,
but there's nothing, it's just saying you can't build that.
I
I'm
do
just wondering
that.
why.
I think the draft allowed for covered entryways, but not porches.
You can have a patio, you can have a porch. So I'm just wondering, I was trying to figure out the definitions. As long as it wasn't covering 30%, if you had these same exact criteria, what would be the difference besides it has a cover?
But you could build a porch on the side of the house as long as it doesn't encroach
The setback.
the setback.
Okay.
Which in a lot of cases, I
Okay.
only need like 3 or 4 feet
Mhm.
from the property line.
Okay.
Yep.
But you can always build it, but in this case, we're just not allowing that encroachment into
Okay.
the setback.
So then that brings
Good
me
point.
to, why don't we say, no more than 30% of any side yard may be covered by a deck? I was just, when I started my questions, I was wondering why these were specific to patios and we don't have them for decks and porches. And if we are allowed, then I misheard and thought that, we don't allow them on the sides, so we don't have to worry about it. But if we do allow them on the sides, why don't we have any requirements like that?
Well, I think you'll always have the lot coverage requirement, right? And we're not,
I don't think a deck
No?
goes in that calculation if it's permeable.
for deck.
Yeah, for deck. And that's what you're asking, what is 5 on the side on the side?
You're talking about a deck or a covered? What are you talking about for the side of the house?
Well, I don't really know the difference between a deck and a porch. That's how I started this conversation, so I'm having a hard time. I don't want to sound stupid, but I'm just saying if you had an open-aired, like if there's not a real solid wall, place to sit.
But it does have a roof.
It has a hangover, yep.
Okay.
Then it's
But
a
that's
porch?
Porch.
Okay, porch. Okay, and so a patio doesn't have that. and neither does a deck.
My patio's on the ground, and it's a patio.
There's no
A
structure.
deck is off the ground, but no cover.
No cover,
And a
okay.
porch is covered off the ground, or,
Okay.
And we do allow patios on the street side yard. So like in between two houses in the middle of the block, I don't think you can't have a patio in the side yard.
Right.
Correct.
I get why we allowed it, I'm
Yeah,
all
in the
happy
rear
with that.
yard. So if I wanted a patio at the back of our lot, say adjacent to our fence that goes along the alley, we approved that, we cannot do that, but it couldn't have a structure like a pergola over it. You know, it could just be
I
like
understand what it
stone.
says, I'm just wondering why? I've seen them, so they're non-conforming, obviously.
I just-
Why? If not more than, if it's between two houses, that's even easier, because nobody else sees that.
I believe it is allowed currently, so if I'm reading this correctly, it says,
it's your neighbor. Yeah.
decks shall not be located in the front yard or street side yard, or the side setback or rear setback of the lot. So that allows it in the yard, but not in the setback.
Right.
Right, so they're currently allowed in the side yard as long as they don't go beyond the setback.
Okay, so to be more regulatory, which I don't want to be, but you would then go and say no more than 30% of any side yard can be covered by a porch. I'm just saying that's what we did for patios, so I prefer we.
Correct, if you wanted to maintain the consistency of the permeability standard, I would agree that that could be considered, whether or not you guys want to include that as up for discussion.
Well, most of our houses are so close together that practically speaking, you couldn't have a porch or patio between the houses. And I don't want to be in my dining room and have somebody on a patio right outside our window. But yeah, you're not going to get to that and have enough, you know, a decent width for a patio or a porch or anything like that in between houses.
Great.
And I just want to double check village code, but
There's a fire issue too, if you've got structures, you know.
Oh, I get it, you're arguing.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
don't even need to explain, because my point,
Yeah,
I like it the
I
way it
see
is.
your point too, about when you've got a side entry, especially on a corner house, having a covered entry
yeah, it's
should be allowed.
So,
You have to do places, one front to one side.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions? I know I'm trying to wait for the director to find what he needs. Yes, Anita Patel?
So if we're talking about permeability, it shouldn't be 30% of the whole yard? Is that,
I thought it would have to do with the.
not like 30% of the side, 30% of the front, it's 30% of the whole yard because we don't want, we don't want a non-permeable structure to cover more than 30% of the yard. That-
Well, for patios, it's just the front or side, depending on where the patio is. For building structure modifications, it's the whole. And
I was
we
just
don't
saying,
have any for decks, or, I mean, for porches, and that was my point of bringing that up, even though I'm
So-
not regulating.
porches, because they're attached to the structure, would be considered part of the structure. So that's already governed by the lot coverage ratios within each residence district. So, for example, in the R5 district, there already is a lot coverage ratio of maximum 30% of lot for principal structure on interior lot, or 40% of principal structure on corner lot. So to me, if you add a porch to that, that goes with your structure. So it already is covered by that 30% coverage ratio. Whereas the patio is not part of the structure, therefore that needed to be spelled out separately. So I think that does make sense why one has it and one doesn't.
Even though it's must, the entire side of the patio must be directly adjacent to the principal structure.
Correct, but it's not a structure itself, it's just a, right. So I think we might have gotten to the answer of that eventually, but I think that covered it.
It's part of the principal structure. Any other questions?
On this one?
No?
so what are we gonna ask?
So yeah, I didn't hear a full consensus on either side. I definitely heard some opinion that some people wanted the other version, some people voiced in favor of this one. I didn't hear a majority of either way, so if you wanted to discuss that, I'd be happy to bring a draft back with whatever the majority of that consensus is. unless you need me to draft two versions of it as well and then debate that again. But that's the main thing I think I'm hearing. Between that and screening would be another.
Can you just reiterate for us, if we went with this draft, and we can definitely take a vote of which draft we wanted to, or which, are we comfortable enough to move forward and put some more stuff in here? But for this one, what are some of the things that you heard that you would bring back to us in a new draft? One was pictures.
Correct, so I would illustrate the 50% coverage of what open means.
You had a question about not if other places do it, or there's a reason, I can't remember what that was. Okay, well, it's good on that one.
I didn't hear much other, there's not a good discussion. I would bring back illustrations of open railings is what I made a note of. I would add a section of notification to neighbors regarding the addition of a porch at the DERG meeting. I guess there was no need to confirm if this is just residential districts only. It sounds like it was okay with that being there.
Allowing the entry, I think Dan was allowing the entry to be a step up.
Correct,
That's
yes.
what I wanted.
Yep, allow step up.
There's a reason for that.
That's all I really have as notes to confirm. So I'd bring that back in the draft and just confirm in whatever question those might be.
And you were also gonna change the height,
To step up?
Yes.
Yep. So I could bring back the draft with those concise questions for the next discussion and see if a recommendation could be drafted up with that, but I would bring back illustrations to perhaps help guide that conversation, but it seems like we're close. We might not all be unanimous, but we're close.
I have one more that I forgot to mention.
Sure.
And then we can decide how we want to proceed. It is on page 26, and it's just covered entryways on the side. It says it can't, in no way can they project closer than 6 feet to the lot line. Most of ours, we even have 6 feet in between. So is that, like you had said before, that if we did it this other way, porches in the front, then it might say no porches because we only have 2 feet. Would that eliminate most people from getting a cover on the
I can confirm that. I believe the current corner side yard setback is 10 feet, so currently the house should have 10 feet there. This would allow the 4-foot covered entry into the 6 feet would be there, so.
So as long as there's 10 feet between houses, what if they're not?
Well, this is for the side yard. This
You're
is for the
talking
corner.
about between houses, you're talking
Oh,
about
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
between.
corners.
Okay.
So within houses, it can't be into the setbacks, that would be the 3 feet. On the corner street side yard ones, it'd be 6 feet.
Okay. Thank you. Attorney Brown.
I just had a clarifying question that based upon the discussion might be helpful. You were talking about the whole porch increasing the footprint of the quote-unquote structure. And there was some discussion earlier of concern that, well, if you put it across the whole front of the, house, that might be too big or too ungaining or whatever, so unsightly. But isn't there essentially an inherent limiting factor that because you're increasing the footprint of the structure itself, with that 30% requirement, green requirement, isn't there sort of an inherent limiting factor that would, in most cases, based upon the size of the existing lots in Shorewood, that for all intents and purposes would, in most cases, prevent that from happening in the first place?
Yep, and that's a great point. So that'd be something I could illustrate, a typical R5 lot with a house, whether or not 30% will prohibit someone from adding it currently, and if
Because I just didn't know what were the principal structures, so now saying that, we should look.
yeah, no, that's a great point to confirm, but we have plenty of surveys on file that we could
Yeah.
calculate it currently and then identify how much an 8-foot addition would impact that number. I think that's a good point.
If you have an existing porch, you can't make it bigger.
Currently or under this code?
So under this code, I walk around, all the bungalows have porches, usually sideways or corners or.
You couldn't make it bigger than 8 feet, correct? So if for some reason it's a 6-foot porch and
You can go up to
you
the
could go,
8 feet.
you could add 2 more feet to it, but you couldn't go you know,
Yes.
6 plus 8.
Go sticking out another
Right,
8 feet.
correct.
Because the front of your house is actually the
Yep.
same depth as the porch.
And I came back from a lunch walk once and I mentioned that to Crystal because I was looking at going like, oh, they can't, I hope that no one thinks they can do that. and this and that. But yeah, the intent is from 8 feet from the main facade of the structure.
So all the bungalows have an L main facade and you fill in that front section of the porch.
Right.
So
Right.
what's the main facade on?
So that, and this could be, so that currently is like a, my understanding is based on our definition of front yard, that currently is like a no man's zone because the front yard doesn't start until the, I think it's the nearest wall to the property line. So yeah, if they do have like an L configuration, that little section right there is currently not regulated by much of anything because it's not in the yard per se. So that's,
Maybe illustrate that.
yeah, yes, yep, I could do that. And I'll confirm whether or not that needs to be worked into here.
You know, Rose, when you were talking about like new communities being built in places like Florida where there's like a zoning code that's gonna cover, say, the whole subdivision, versus a community like Shorewood that was built over time, starting more than 100 years ago. I guess maybe Commissioner Hanson could tell me from an architect's viewpoint, when you have code like we have existing code that governs property setbacks and what you can do in front yards and stuff, going back a number of decades, it was put in place for a reason when people before us established the village or set up the building codes. So I'm just wondering, from a professional architectural standpoint, how do other communities honor those old codes? Do they kind of say, well, that worked then, but now we want to do something different?
This code probably was put in place after a lot of it was built.
Well, and that's the thing, I
Yes.
kind of respect that, like somebody said before, each block can be different, you know, in both its character and its, the setbacks and how uniform it is. Some blocks are very uniform, some are not at all. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. And when you build like the new, especially these, like Seaside and Windsor and all these communities down in Florida that, you know, they regulate what kind of shingle you can put on the roof. I mean, those are highly, highly regulated, but they're all being built at once. And that's,
Those are a little different too, because they're neighborhood associations rather than municipal regulations. You can't even hang your laundry out or park a car in the driveway. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
they
different.
layer them. But to answer your question, I think there's a lot of time periods that think one way. So for instance, a lot of times there's a new thing in planning school back in the 90s that was called CEPTED, and it was like crime prevention through environmental design was new because the old thinking when a regulation was in place was we should have, you know, bushes and no parking on the streets, and they had all these ways that they thought would fight, you know, and then a new generation came in and came up with the planning idea that high bushes create crime, you should be able to have eyes on the street, you should have more parking on the street, you should have, so they flip the code for different reasons, and that happens, that's just one example, that happens all the time, so I can never go back and say, what were they thinking when they did it? But just like us sitting around, they probably talked about it, and they came up with an idea, and they wrote regulation. That's what I've experienced, and they change. People update their zoning codes. We went in downtown Milwaukee from just regular zoning to street-based, form-based zoning. So it was how, you know, based on the form of the building rather than a zone, residential zone, because we were seeing more mixed-use development, and we wanted to promote that. Sidewalk cafes were written out. You were prohibited in your zoning codes for many until Norquist came about and wrote it in that they're permitted. So it's just, what are you trying to promote? That's when we started the conversation. It is, do you think porches are an okay thing? Do you want to promote them, or do you want to prohibit, you know, like, so that's when you change your code to say, what is the feeling of the community right now?
I mean, Shorewood is known for its variety of architecture and, you know, vintage homes that I just don't want to do anything that's going to, I don't know what the right word is, not tarnish, but, you know, that's going to diminish that love, you know, various blocks and neighborhoods that, you know, make people want to move here.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it's a tricky issue.
And it's hard to say, is that design? Is design review, does that cover it, or is that really
But it's all
zoning, which is
governs
use?
design, so.
Correct.
Yeah, and just for reference, I mean, talk about parking regulations as well, like a lot of zoning templates, you know, were developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s that were kind of treated in an era when, you know, suburban development was better than urban development. Urban redevelopment, we're all trying to make it, you know, more suburban. Now we've flipped the switch once again where we're valuing urban neighborhoods, you know, like Shorewood where it's walkable and it's more community-based. And so a lot of these codes that are on the books were drafted and adopted in an era when planning and regulations were trying to write, like, you know, wipe things clean and do it differently. So it does go back and forth. And I think for a community like Shorewood, it makes more sense to have more contextual rather than blanket statements. And so if we ever get to it, the park regulations are very similar, where we were developed before park regulations ever came about, and then all of a sudden we adopted them, and now every time we look at it, we go, wait, we don't have 20 parking spaces for this clinic. Well, there's a reason we don't. We probably never should have required it in the first place, but it was the thing to do was to adopt things like that to make it
To match
more
our
suburban, right? So
downtown Milwaukee eliminated their parking regulations.
that's a conversation for a different day.
Okay, so what would you like from us? What do you need from us?
The only thing I would like confirmation of is whether or not there's consensus if this allowing 8 feet but in no place closer than 10 feet version is acceptable, or if you'd like it to be more contextual to allow a plus or minus based on your neighbor or your neighboring block.
Does everyone feel like they have enough information to make that decision today?
Or I could bring back 2 options if that's necessary, but that's a lot of work.
I feel comfortable with that, that's my opinion. Maybe you could put in that 30% back into here. You know what I mean, just for ease of understanding. Yeah, or reference that particular, because that makes it very clear that we're not going to see something way out of scale, because there's that limit of 30% of your.
Oh, you mean for the entire yard?
Yeah.
You could.
I mean, because that's what I was
true,
worried about, this whole
reiterate it.
scale thing is just
Yeah, it would
reference it
just-
right back.
It would say, you know, in consideration of the district's lot coverage ratios as defined within.
I mean, just to
chapter
reference
20.
it, so when somebody looks at it, they don't get confused either, that they could just do whatever they want.
It's easy for both staff and the applicant to understand that it's a requirement over here, whereas they should take note of it while they're looking at this one. That makes great sense.
That makes great sense, because.
Oftentimes, things get overlooked because they're not cross-referenced, and then you go, oh, shoot, we didn't realize that this was over here, so that's a good point.
The other thing that might be helpful to have is, you had something about in figuring out the setback, having that 10% leeway, and that was to deal with houses that are outliers, say on the back lot line instead of lined up, because otherwise you've got the front setback going for the living room, you know, so that 10% kind of.
So you want to
I'll
leave
say that would only apply to version 2. Because in the current version, there is no calculating necessary, it's just that you're allowed 8 as long as you're not within 10 feet, but.
It was that averaging of the houses on the block that kind of, you've got one house that throws the whole average out that makes it unworkable for everybody.
Yeah, so that would be a version 2 addition, if that's the direction.
Proposing that.
So what I would propose is the version that does not address percentages and block, whatever you just mentioned,
Calculation.
Yeah.
Yes.
The average setback.
is in front of us. And it doesn't mean this is the right version, but it's either, so we'll just say, this one says what? It says,
Allows every property an 8-foot porch, subject to the 10-foot maximum.
so do you want us just to vote on that criteria?
Yeah, it's just
Because that's
a
what-
recommend, it's a vote for referencing, it's not, yeah.
For direction. To give
Yeah, I would
direction.
appreciate that, so I
Yes.
don't have to go back and forth and
Okay, so someone could make a motion, just say,
to direct staff, correct, yeah.
direct staff to continue on with, you know, providing whatever, next version
Mhm.
with this criteria.
Right, with this version of setbacks.
So I can make a motion on that, so I make a motion for the next version of the criteria for porches to follow this, is it 3A1, where porches may project up to 8 feet from the main facade, covered entry remains 4 feet, However, in no instance closer than 10 feet from the front lot line.
Second.
Okay,
So the motion is
Motion,
to direct
second.
staff to come back with that.
To continue with
Just to
that.
continue
with
with
this
the
version.
draft with that premise.
Right, and not do a second one without a.
Not
Because
continue.
there's with the average, and not use an average setback.
With some illustrating examples.
Yes, although we won't be talking, if you say yes to this, what Bart's trying to get at, that's why I think you might want to vote no. So just to be clear, he will not be coming back with pictures of setbacks anymore, like of the percentage of, or that would have been decided, and we're just moving on to the other aspects that we talked about today, which is more mesh, more visible,
Right, 50% openness
Openness.
requirements.
so more
And then
than,
30% lot coverage. Those are the two illustrations that I would be bringing back
In the
under this current motion.
bungalow, L-shaped bungalow.
In the front yard, yes, in the front yard, no man's land is like, perfect.
does that make sense, Jen, sorry? Does that make sense? I mean, you understand it, so you can vote, okay? Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 5-3. Okay, does that help you with direction?
Correct, yes, thank you.
All right, does anyone else have any discussion or questions on this part?
Nope.
All right, so we'll see you next time on this.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Next item for discussion is to review the Plan Commission 2018 annual report.
So I drafted the annual report on page 29 of the packet. There's not really much to discuss here unless you want to discuss if I'm missing anything, but this just gives a snapshot of the actions that the Plan Commission undertook in 2018. So if there's any questions on it, I'd be happy to answer that if I'm missing anything.
What public land do we approve selling?
Recommendation for the fire station.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I think that was in February or March
That's the only
meeting.
one, that's fine. Good luck with that.
That was 17, 18, when was that?
It was early 2018, but that was a recommendation provided by the Plan Commission.
Oh, this is for last year.
2018, correct. Yep,
So these are your accomplishments, correct?
yes.
Yeah, I see nothing. Does anyone have any comments or additions to the report? Otherwise, you'll be submitting it to,
To village manager, just for reference.
okay? And then I guess the next, is it a separate item? No?
Yes.
Yeah, it is, okay. I don't want my cheat sheet. Discuss and consider Plan Commission 2020 initiatives.
So I did provide a quick memo regarding this of things that that were recommended last year that we kind of already worked on, and so let me just make sure I get the right paragraph here. So provided with this packet was last year's proposed initiatives for reconsideration and/or editing. Staff knows that item 1 should be removed as the Plan Commission is currently working on it, that is the porches. Item 8 should also be removed as already been assigned to planning director's work queue, that is the sign code. Item 2 is also partially accomplished in that required neighbor notifications were passed as part of the updates for both solar panels and conditional use permits, so that was a desire of the Plan Commission to be more, to provide more information and notice to things. So once again, if this porch gets drafted as that, we'll be continuing to do that as we can. So we are working on that continuously. And then lastly, staff would like to point out that item 9 should be selected as a top priority, as the village must begin work on updating its comprehensive plan within the next year, as it's required to be renewed by 2021. And so the state has a requirement for you to have a current comp plan no older than 10 years. And the only clawback that I'm aware of on that is that you technically should not be amending your zoning code without an up-to-date comp plan. So if by chance we don't adopt one in time, we would kind of be locked into not being able to update our zoning code without confirming that it's in conformance with that. Yes.
I get all that, but they go in chapters of comp plans,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
I mean, you give an intro and then you have chapters, and they're based on the elements of your comprehensive plan. What elements does the Plan Commission,
So
what would we be working on?
all, I believe, is it 9 required chapters? Is it 9 or 11?
So like transport, let me just, the reason I say this is when we talk about that prioritization, transportation is one of those elements, but we're working on that through the transportation study, which eventually will get back to Plan Commission, correct? at some point, because you'd have to write it into the comp plan. And
As for the
policies.
comp planning, if it's incorporated within there, it would, correct. If it's not, if it's kept as a separate document, it wouldn't have to go to planning commission per se, that's a board and CEA initiative currently.
Right.
But if it is the intent to incorporate that within that document, then it would come back as part of the update to that chapter.
Okay, so you're talking, we would be working on all 9 chapters, whatever, 9 or
Correct. Yep, and
That's a huge undertaking.
it is, and so, so the reason that that I'm asking that it be considered as an initiative is because I need to get further direction on how big of a project this is going to be, whether or not it's me hiring an intern to help me update it, from what it is, or whether or not it's me requesting budget money from the board to hire a consultant to do it. So I'm asking for it to be an initiative so that I understand your direction, so that by the time budget comes around, I know what request to make.
Sorry for all the questions.
No.
As a board member, I don't know which parts make up our current comprehensive plans. We have different plans floating out there. So is there a way to send the link to the commissioners to say, here is our comp plan? I think it was a 2030 comp plan.
Yeah, so, and if it's selected as a priority, it definitely will be having conversations, and I can put on the next agenda for, discussion, because like I said, I'll want to know which chapters or what.
We still need to know what it is. If you could just send that link out regardless,
I definitely can.
because we're doing zoning.
Does this process involve like public forums also, or is it
Yeah.
Yes, there's minimum requirements for that.
I would think you would need consultants for.
So my understanding is the previous one was not drafted through a consultant.
And
It
that's why I
was,
don't know what it is.
correct, it was.
I don't need to be rude.
So, the planning director hired an intern to help draft it, and I don't know what the public components of that were, it was 10 years ago. But, so the state statutes have very specific requirements of what needs to be in there, and so my belief is that the current comp plan kind of just checked off those requirements and said, these are our current demographics, these are what we project them to be in 10, 15, 20 years, check, it's in there. But some people's comprehensive plans have a lot more public outreach and engagement, and they incorporate a lot more things, so if the planning commission wants to undertake that kind of endeavor, it would require budget money. So like I said, I'd like to have that conversation this summer, so when budget comes around in early fall, I can, estimate how much money I'll need for that project. If for some reason, and it sounds like maybe we're not leaning that way, but if for some reason we think we can get away with doing less, I wouldn't need to ask for as much money. I could put it in a budget request to hire an intern to help update it like we did last time. So because we already have a model to go off of. And so I'll send out the link if it seems
And the law.
acceptable. And I can send out the statute as well.
And how does this, there was a plan that we worked through some years ago that.
Central District Master Plan,
I
probably.
think that was
Probably,
central district.
yeah.
That's
So-
why I asked which version. That's not the comp plan.
That's not the comp plan.
Does that become part of, is,
It could be incorporated once
So
again.
in Milwaukee, they referenced any existing plans that they wanted to keep
okay.
as active.
I think you're remembering that when we had the sessions.
The session at the library, yeah, right. Okay.
So yeah, my brief understanding is, in 2010, it was more of a, checklist kind of comp plan, like make sure it's all in there. And the village has done other plans subsequent to that on specific items, whether it was the Central District Master Plan or now, the transportation and parking, but the other way to do it would be to adopt those within the plan or reference them within the plan so that they're all part of the actual plan.
So what we said, and just a minute here, in Milwaukee, we had the same problem, because we're in a built environment, and we're trying to, at the time, it was 1999, go back, and we had plans, but then it's like, well, now we need a comp plan. What is that? And basically, as long as those area plans, so the central business district or the park plan, as long as those area or resource-specific plans do not contradict the much more broad and general policies, like we support mixed-use development, right? And then as long as it doesn't prohibit mixed-use development, like if it's not those bigger policies, then they stay in place and you can reference them and even bring in some if you're talking about areas. But if in general, like you had the plan from the 70s and it talked about renewal communities and you're supposed to tear down everything and start new, you would then not incorporate that into it because it would conflict with your we're a mixed-use community. So it's more, the comp plan is very much more general, but it does have your basic policies that you're putting forward. Is that
Yep,
correct to
it's
say?
the official plan for the village, so
Yeah.
any
And then-
action by the board, plan commission, anything should match up with the intent of that. So it is a general.
So item number 5, looking at revising the zoning code in this chicken and egg kind of situation.
It would come next.
It would come after the comprehensive
Should.
plan. Because I mean, there's simple things like now that Wilson's drive's finished, we should rezone the land adjacent on the west side as parkland preservation.
So the comp plan would just say, you know, preservation is the goal, we want to keep all of, you know, it would be very broad, and then you can take it down to the zoning, which is very specific.
Yeah, so in the comp plan, there should be a future land use map that would just say, you know, generally this is residential, generally this is industrial, generally this is whatever. But then we have, you know, very specific types within those. So the comp plan is the general thing, the zoning code would be the more specific arm underneath that. There's nothing saying that we can't continue to do those things, we need to get the comp plan.
So if we wanted to rezone capital to have the area east of Oakland different than west of Oakland, which now they're the same, that would come after this comprehensive plan was done, and that plan wouldn't say, too late, can't.
Yeah, as long as the comprehensive plan identifies the area as commercial, what type of commercial is up to.
And how high the commercial.
Right, all those individual specific regulations would come after that. But if nothing's changing in the current comp plan, nothing's stopping us from doing that now. In terms of prioritizing my workload and budget money, I would argue this probably is
And
pressing.
the historic properties in districts number 7, is that something you don't have time for, but could like a citizens group get involved? I had an email from one this
Yes.
morning asking, I think you would refer to me, asking about that, and I thought it's the same thing with the preservation of the fire station. There's a group of residents who researched it and, you know, kind of promoted preserving it, that maybe that's something that.
Yeah, so my
you know,
understanding-
a citizens group could, residents group could start with that.
Yep, I did confirm that, so my understanding is a subcommittee of any committee could be formed as long as it's not infracting on a walking quorum, to, you know, to work on that separately and bring it back to the group, you know, as a draft is ready or as more information is ready for the whole group then to reconsider. But a subgroup could work on it, and if I'm wrong, Nathan can weigh in on that, but I believe that is how.
We don't really have to worry about blocking, I mean, you can just notice the meeting.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't even have to include any of us. I'm just saying, if there's a group of residents who want to have a historic preservation.
Oh, they can work on whatever.
Yeah, so no one's stopping anyone from doing
Yeah.
anything, just a matter of getting adopted would have to come through, you know, the board or the plan commission, so. But if the plan commission wanted to pick, you know, number 7 as one of its high priorities, I'll just be honest and say I don't have time to work on that, but if you guys wanted to do that and form a subcommittee or invite citizens to do that, you could do that, it would just have to come back to the full plan commission for consideration at some point.
And that would have to be decided today, obviously, because
Correct, no,
we
it's,
need to know what we need staff.
yep, so you could continue with this list, I gave you some suggestions to remove and some to prioritize, but you could keep this list, there's nothing saying it has to be thrown out or anything, it's just a matter of,
Next
Well-
year.
right,
Although, so the way that I understand prioritization this year, and Rebecca and I were on the phone this morning, this is a statutory committee, and so statutory committees, non-statutory committees like pet and bike safety, those really can pick what they want to work on, but statutory committees, the board will be reviewing and
okay,
prioritizing.
so I was unaware of that,
So,
separate.
it doesn't mean that, but we should say what's important. I'm sure you'll be standing there in front of the board saying, this is what I really think somebody from the board should be prioritizing as
Right.
well. But I'm just, if we as a plan commission wanted to make a recommendation, the board will be reviewing that. Parking regulations, my question is, I definitely think that's one of them because they're outdated, as in Milwaukee they were. But what, I'm just unclear on the timing of, like, it's gonna have to be done based on the transportation and parking study. There's gonna be some recommendations, then we're gonna have a comp plan that might address safety and it's better to park, I don't know what it would say, but something broader. When does this, I don't know the timing, so just think about that, parking regulations in our zoning code. When does that timing fall? Because you're not gonna let it just sit there if
So
you're
to-
not,
Right, if I had more time, it could happen right now.
but I would think you want the transportation and parking study,
True,
or do you want it simultaneous, that's what I'm asking.
yeah, no, I point well taken. I would want to not consider it until we have the information from that analysis. But based on that, it could happen anytime after that.
It could happen concurrently, that's what I'm asking your opinion. Is it better to happen concurrently as we're getting feedback from the transportation and then looking at our parking as a group?
So it can happen concurrently if the group wants to prioritize that. So we will have information from the study that will be presented to the board as, you know, a list of options of things to move forward. It's not going to be a plan per se that says, do this, do that, check in 6 months and whatever. It's going to be more, you know, the planning commission should consider revising these, and then at that point it'd be assigned to you and whether or not you want to, you know, bump porches to take it up or not. I would like the group to focus on one ordinance amendment at a time just for, you know, discussion sanity. But so, yeah, it doesn't need to wait until the comp plan is done, is I guess what I'm saying. The analysis will give us good direction on it, and if you want to choose as a priority for next year, I have no issues with that.
I just would hate, and that's why I'm asking the timing, and you can always come back to us, but I just would hate to have the study that you paid, you know, 90 grand for, and you have concrete board adopted recommendations, and then to wait another, you know, and then you kind of forget. That's what
Yeah, I would like to
happens.
act on as much as we can, as soon as we can. Just,
Yes, at the end of the minutes, the transportation study was mentioned, and said the commissioner desires to be in the advisory committee for study one can be recommended. Has that ship sailed, or?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
That if one of us wanted to be on the advisory committee for the transportation study?
Oh, we're working through that. We haven't adopted the process yet.
Okay.
The board is going to
Correct.
be talking about it at the next meeting.
so either at the May 6th or May 20th meeting, I hope to confirm the consultant able to come out to Shorewood to discuss that. So the contents of the technical advisory group is still up for review and confirmation. So if there's a plan commissioner who would like to mention anything, and
Nobody will be appointed. All the board is going to be considering is the process for how, and what sections need to be represented, what types of areas of the you know, business people, landlords, and then the process for how do we appoint people to this commission or advisory committee will be decided, but not in May. I don't see any nominations going on. We're just trying to figure out, does the board agree?
I agree that this is an important priority, considering that every year we're asked to get parking exceptions for a couple businesses, so.
Could staff just give us a recommendation on that one? Like, does it make sense would you recommend prioritizing that after the transportation study is done?
yeah, so like I said, my first priority for the plan commission would be the comprehensive plan, just so that I can get direction on where to go from that. And then beyond that, any of these is fine by me. So I feel like timing-wise, President Rosick is accurate in saying we'll have, you know, fresh information that will be easy to act upon and digest. So that makes a lot of sense. I have no issues with agreeing with that recommendation. Because like I said, number 1 should hopefully be done well before 2020. Number 8 is being worked on. And then number 2, like I said, is kind of a continual process improvement. So at that point, we're down to number 3, off-street parking. 4 would be the actual uses, conditional, permitted, and prohibited in each district. That's going to be a larger undertaking that we will have to do a lot more background on. So I would push that one back further. Design standards, that's a larger conversation as to whether or not we look at form-based code kind of things. And so that's going to, you know, require a lot more discussion as well. The zoning map review is an easier thing that will probably take place within the comprehensive plan, you know, update, because we'll be making those maps and just reviewing them, but that, I would, you know, consider that as a top one. Historic properties and districts, I don't have much background on that as to whether or not the plan commission wants to pursue that. And so, yeah, my recommendation would be to choose number 9 as number 1, and then I agree number 3, 3, 6, 4, 5, 7 would be my quick